The Falkland or Malvinas Islands are an archipelago located in the southwestern Atlantic Ocean off the coast of South America. These islands were discovered in 1690 by English navigators John Davies, who named them after the 5th Viscount of Falkland. Having discovered the islands and the strait between them, the British continued their expedition without founding any settlements. For about 100 years, the islands remained uninhabited until the French navigator Louis-Antoine de Bougainville landed on them in 1764, who founded the settlement of Port Louis on the eastern island. The very next year, British capital John Byron landed on Saunders Island, located in the western part of the archipelago. Not suspecting that there was already a French settlement on the islands, Byron declared the entire archipelago the property of Great Britain. A few years later, in 1766, in the same bay in which Byron had previously landed, Captain McBride landed, who founded the first English settlement in the archipelago. Meanwhile, the French in 1767 decide to sell their settlement, and with it the rights to the archipelago, to the Spaniards, who appointed their governor of the new territory. Exploring the acquired archipelago, the Spaniards, to their surprise, encounter the English settlement of Port Egmont. Since the Spaniards did not plan to tolerate the presence of the British on their archipelago, in 1770 they attacked Port Egmont and expelled the English settlers from the island. These events on the islands almost caused a war between Spain and Great Britain. Since no one wanted to start a full-fledged war because of a small archipelago, a peace treaty was concluded, under the terms of which the English settlers were able to return to Port Egmont in 1771. However, the English settlers returned to the islands for a short time, since in 1776 the British decided to leave part of their overseas possessions, including Port Egmont. Special mention deserves the fact that when leaving the archipelago, the English settlers left a commemorative plaque as confirmation of their rights to this territory. In 1811, the Spaniards also decide to leave the islands, but at the same time they also leave a commemorative plaque as confirmation of their rights to this territory. Nevertheless, the archipelago did not remain a draw for long. Already on November 6, 1820, Colonel David Jewett raised the flag of the United Provinces of South America over the settlement of Port Louis, and in 1828 the merchant Louis Vernet founded a settlement on the islands. At the same time, he secured himself and received permission to establish a settlement from both the British authorities and the Argentine authorities, who, after the independence of Argentina, considered the archipelago to be theirs. In 1831, Vernet, along with his people, captured several American ships that carried out seal hunting in the vicinity of the archipelago. In response to this, the American consul in Argentina stated that the United States does not recognize the sovereignty of Argentina over the archipelago, and therefore, Vernet's actions to seize ships are illegal. Also, the U.S. authorities sent a warship to the islands, which returned the captured ships. It should be noted that there is a version that an American ship destroyed the Vern settlement. A year later, the Argentine government decided to set up a penal colony on the islands, restoring a settlement there, but when a new governor arrived on the island, a rebellion suddenly broke out. The rebels killed the governor and thus thwarted plans to organize a penal colony on the island. As for Vernet, he did not appear on the islands again. There is a version that he sold his possessions to an enterprising English merchant, who made a huge amount of effort to convince the British government to return control of the archipelago. It is difficult to say how reliable this version is, but nevertheless, on January 2, 1833, the British landed on the island, after which they notified the Argentine authorities that they had restored their power over the archipelago. Of course, the Argentine authorities did not like this scenario, but they did not have the strength to recapture the islands from the British Empire, which at that time had a huge navy. Only in the 20th century, after the creation of the UN, Argentina tried to regain its power over the islands. The Argentine authorities failed to resolve the issue through diplomacy, since most of the inhabitants of the island were from Britain, the British refused to consider the issue of transferring the archipelago to Argentina. Argentina did not recognize British authority over the islands, but at the same time did not attempt to return them. The situation escalated in 1981, when General Leopoldo Galtieri came to power in Argentina, who decided to establish control over the archipelago. The fact is that after the Second World War, Great Britain lost almost all of its colonies and therefore could no longer maintain a large navy. Therefore, General Galtieri decided that Britain simply could not provide the defense of the archipelago. On March 19, 1982, Argentine workers landed on the island of South Georgia under the pretext that they needed to dismantle an old whaling station. As soon as the Argentines were on the island, they immediately raised the Argentine flank. The British soldiers who were on the island, of course, did not like this and they tried to force the Argentine workers to leave the archipelago. As soon as the Argentine workers were attacked by the British, the Argentine army came to their aid, which was in a state of full readiness. The Argentine army landed on the coast of the archipelago in several places, about 600 soldiers, who began to move towards the city of Stanley. Having met practically no resistance, the Argentine troops managed to surround the city and the local British garrison of about 100 soldiers. On April 2, 1982, they were forced to capitulate. Already on April 3, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution that demanded the withdrawal of Argentine troops from the archipelago. It should be understood that the collapse of the British Empire, which occurred after the Second World War, caused a protracted social crisis in the country. Therefore, British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was well aware that the loss of the Falklands could set off a chain reaction in which Britain could quickly lose all of its overseas territories. The British government decided to act immediately. Despite the fact that Britain, after the loss of the colonies, could no longer maintain such a huge fleet as it had previously, the British government was able to devote an impressive amount of forces to regain control of the lost archipelago. On April 5, the British fleet moved towards the Falkland Islands. The forces that were sent to the shores of the archipelago included about 100 ships, including 2 aircraft carriers carrying 42 aircraft. Also taking part in the campaign was the ocean liner Queen Elizabeth, which was used as a transport ship for transporting troops. In turn, Argentina could not boast of a powerful fleet. It had only 1 aircraft carrier, obsolete by that time, but at the same time, the Argentine army had the opportunity to use aircraft from ground airfields. The basis of the Argentine aviation was the obsolete American A-4 attack aircraft, most of which were in poor technical condition. Prior to the outbreak of the conflict, Argentina began to receive French Super Étendard attack aircraft, which were armed with Exocet anti-ship missiles. The problem was that after Argentina occupied the Falkland Islands, the French stopped supplying weapons. Thus, the Argentine army had only 5 Exocet missiles at its disposal. The English fleet arrived on the shores of the archipelago on April 12 and organized a naval blockade to make it difficult to supply the Argentine garrison on the islands. Active hostilities began only on May 1. English long-range Vulcan bombers launch a massive attack on an airfield located near the capital of the Falkland Islands. Meanwhile, Argentina tried to use its fleet to push the British ships away from the archipelago. This attempt was doomed to failure, as the Argentine army had insufficient intelligence data. Therefore, without even having time to turn around in battle formations, the Argentine fleet was attacked by the British. On May 2, an English submarine sank an Argentinian light cruiser, which was built during the Second World War, using torpedoes. After the loss of the cruiser, the Argentine fleet refused to attack the British ships and decided to return to its shores. Realizing that with the help of the fleet, the blockade of the archipelago could not be lifted, the Argentine command decided to rely on aviation. On May 4, the Argentine army used its main weapon, namely the French Super Étendard attack aircraft armed with Exocet missiles. Since the Argentines had only 5 of these missiles, the newest British destroyer Sheffield was chosen as the target. As a result of the aircraft attack, the destroyer was seriously damaged and sank. The missiles showed high efficiency, but quickly ended, so the Argentine aircraft continued to attack the English fleet with conventional bombs, but the effectiveness of these attacks was extremely low. The fact is that the bombs were made more than 30 years ago and were not designed to be dropped from a low altitude, so their fuses often did not work even after hitting the deck. A temporary lull formed in the hostilities, which lasted until the second half of May. On the night of May 21st, the British began landing in San Carlos Bay. The landing was quite successful. The British troops managed to quickly break the resistance of the small Argentine garrison and establish control over the bay. At dawn, Argentine aircraft entered the fray and attacked the British ships taking part in the landing. For unknown reasons, the Argentine aircraft attacked the warships covering the landing, and not the transport ships with the landing force, which were practically defenseless. Nevertheless, Argentine aircraft managed to sink one frigate and damage several more enemy ships, although in this battle they lost 14 aircraft. The next day, continuing the air raids of the Argentine army, they managed to sink 2 more British ships, but in this attack, the Argentine aircraft continued to lose aircraft. In principle, the exchange of obsolete aircraft for British warships was in favor of Argentina, if not for one thing. Argentina had very few aircraft at its disposal, so air raids soon became less intense. Meanwhile, the British landing force was advancing deep into the island. On May 28, 690 British paratroopers attacked Argentine detachments with a total number of about 1,000 soldiers near the villages of Goose Green and Darwin. On the side of the Argentines there was a numerical advantage, but they were opposed by an elite unit of the British Army. A fierce battle ensued, which lasted all day. By nightfall, the British managed to surround the Argentine troops near the village of Goose Green. The British offered them to surrender, stating that if they refused, the city would be subjected to a massive bombardment. The Argentines accepted the ultimatum and capitulated. At this time, another part of the British landing was moving towards the city of Port Stanley. On June 8, the British command decided to send reinforcements to the troops advancing on Port Stanley. Landing ships approached the coast, but for unknown reasons they did not immediately land troops. At this time, landing ships without air defense cover were attacked by Argentine aircraft. As a result of the air raid, about 50 British paratroopers were killed, and one of the landing ships was seriously damaged, due to which it had to be flooded. Despite the losses suffered, the British still managed to block the Argentine detachments near the city of Port Stanley with the help of 2 landing brigades. On the night of June 12, an attack began, which turned out to be extremely successful for the British Army. The British managed to knock out the Argentine troops from the heights near the capital of the Falkland Islands by morning, which put the Argentine army in a very difficult position. Knowing full well that due to the blockade of the archipelago by the English fleet, the Argentine garrison would not be able to receive reinforcements and ammunition on June 14, the Argentine detachments capitulated. At the same time, the war was officially completed only on June 20, when the British established control over all the islands of the archipelago. This ended the Falklands War. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so as not to miss new videos.